Picture this: months of tireless effort, dedicated care, watering and weeding. Your garden is finally ready to lavish you with its bounty. But what if I told you that a single misstep at the very last moment could obliterate up to half of everything you've cultivated? This isn't a horror story. It's a harsh reality for countless gardeners. Today, we're going to break down the top 7 harvesting mistakes that turn triumph into tragedy. And I promise, some of these might genuinely surprise you. Harvesting often feels like the simple, joyful culmination of a long journey. We see it in movies, people smiling as they pluck perfect apples or tomatoes. But beneath that idyllic image lies a surprising amount of science. Our ancestors knew. Harvesting isn't merely about plucking produce from the branch. It's a ritual that demands knowledge and the right approach. Fail to follow these rules, and those seemingly juicy fruits will rot away in just a couple of days. Alright, so mistake number 1, and it's quite a sneaky one. It's all about timing. Either rushing things or, on the flip side, procrastinating. It might seem like just one day won't make a difference, but that's a common misconception. Let's talk about rushing. You gaze at your almost ripe tomato and think, I'll pick it today, it can finish ripening inside. That'll be safer. Sound familiar? That's a huge misstep. A fruit harvested prematurely will never reach its full flavour potential. Sure, it might turn red on your windowsill, but that's just an illusion of ripeness. Inside it'll still be tart, grassy and watery. All those precious sugars, vitamins and aromatic compounds, the plant develops them in the final days of ripening, right there on the vine. By picking it early, you're essentially shortchanging yourself of the best part. Then there's the other extreme. Waiting too long. You might think, just one more day, it'll only get sweeter. And suddenly, your perfectly crisp cucumber has turned into a yellow, overgrown barrel with tough skin and massive seeds. And that juicy strawberry? It's now a soft, squishy mess that will be ruined before you even get it home. Overripe fruits don't just lose flavour and texture, they also send a signal to the plant. Mission accomplished, you can stop producing now. This means you risk missing out on the next wave of your harvest. So the key secret here is keen observation and really knowing your specific crops. Hitting that sweet spot of ripeness. Now that's a true art. Now let's talk about the second major mistake, neglecting the right tools. Many gardeners believe their hands are all they need, twisting, yanking and ripping off fruits, convinced it's the most natural way. But in reality, this is incredibly harsh on your plants. Picture this. You're pulling off a tomato or a pepper. This leaves a jagged, open wound on the stem, much like an open cut on human skin. This open wound becomes an immediate entry point for all kinds of infections, fungi, and bacteria. Your plant experiences stress, diverting its precious energy from producing more fruit to healing the injury. In some cases, it can even fall ill and die. What's more, you're also damaging the fruit itself. When you yank it off, the stem attachment point is often compromised, leading to tiny, almost invisible microcracks. You might not even notice them, but these are precisely where the rotting process will begin within a day or two. The right approach is to always use a sharp and, very importantly, clean tool. This could be a small hand pruner, garden shears, or even a sharp knife. With one clean, precise movement, you make a neat cut, ideally leaving a small part of the stem attached. The wound on the plant is minimal and heals quickly, while the fruit remains perfectly intact, ready for much longer storage. This isn't just a preference, it's essential garden surgery. Another crucial point many gardeners overlook is the timing of their harvest. You might wonder, does it really matter if I pick a cucumber in the morning or at midday? The answer, surprisingly, is a resounding yes. Picking your produce in the scorching midday sun is one of the worst things you can do. Just think about how your leafy greens look on a hot afternoon. Slightly droopy, losing their crispness. The same applies to your fruits and vegetables. Under the blazing sun, plants actively transpire, rapidly losing moisture. This makes the produce a bit less juicy and firm. They're essentially under stress. By harvesting them at this point, you effectively lock in that stress state. This means your harvest won't store as well and will wilt much faster. The ideal time to harvest most crops is early morning, right after the dew has evaporated. Overnight, plants have had a chance to rest, rehydrate, and cool down. At this time, your produce is at its peak, incredibly juicy, firm, crisp, and bursting with vitality. An early morning harvest is your best guarantee that your vegetables, berries, and greens will store longer and retain their fresh quality. If an early morning harvest isn't possible, your second best option is the evening, once the intense heat of the day has subsided. This is definitely better than picking at midday, but morning still remains the preferred choice. Just remember this simple rule: harvest when the plant is thriving and comfortable, not when it's struggling for survival under the beating sun. Here's another less obvious, yet incredibly damaging mistake: rough handling of freshly harvested produce. We're often in a rush and don't consider the consequences. Picture this: you're picking apples and tossing them into a bucket from a height, or stacking delicate zucchini in a pile like firewood, or perhaps dumping a whole bucket of tomatoes into a crate. Sound familiar? Each of these actions inflicts a micro-injury on your produce. We tend to think that if the skin looks intact, everything's fine. But that's not true. A forceful impact or strong pressure damages the cells beneath the skin, creating a tiny, often invisible bruise. You won't notice it immediately. However, this seemingly minor injury becomes a weak point. Within a few days of storage, spoilage will start exactly at that bruised spot. A dark patch will appear, quickly turning into a centre of rot. And remember, one spoiled berry or damaged tomato can quickly contaminate an entire box. Therefore, handle your harvest as if it were incredibly fragile. Instead of tossing fruits and vegetables, gently place them into their containers. Avoid creating tall piles which can crush the lower layers. Opt for several shallow crates rather than one deep bucket. Careful handling at harvest time is the best way to ensure your hard-earned produce stores well and lasts longer. Let's turn our attention to the weather, which so often dictates our plans. A common mistake, often driven by impatience, is harvesting in unsuitable weather conditions. The most frequent blunder? Picking your produce right after a rain shower or when there's still heavy dew. It might seem convenient. The produce looks clean and fresh. But in reality, it's a direct route to rapid spoilage. Excess moisture on the surface of your fruits and vegetables creates an ideal environment for the rapid growth of mold and various fungal diseases. When you pack this wet produce into crates, especially with poor ventilation, you're essentially creating a perfect hothouse for rot. This is particularly critical for delicate berries like strawberries and raspberries, as well as for tomatoes and zucchini. If it has rained, allow your produce to fully dry on the plant. Let the wind and sun do their work. Never store produce that's still wet. While scorching sun is another extreme we've discussed, there's also another crucial nuance. Avoid harvesting immediately after heavy watering. The mechanism is the same as with rain. Produce, especially root vegetables like carrots or potatoes, will be saturated with excess moisture. Their tissues become softer and more vulnerable to damage and subsequent rot. Allow the soil to dry out a bit first. The ideal harvesting weather is dry, not too hot, and slightly overcast. This is the key to healthy, long-lasting fruits and vegetables. Now let's talk about harvesting strategy. This is where a common yet significant mistake often occurs, driven by the desire to get everything done in one go. It's what we call the everything at once harvest. Many gardeners, especially on weekends, head out to their plots aiming to collect absolutely everything that's ripe. They'll pluck every cucumber, every zucchini, every tomato that's shown even a hint of colour. On the surface, this seems perfectly logical. However, for many crops, this approach is actually counterproductive. Plants that produce fruit in waves, like cucumbers, zucchini, beans, peppers, and eggplants, thrive on the principle of the more you pick, the more they grow. Regularly and promptly harvesting young fruit sends a clear signal to them. Quick, we need to form new ones to ensure our lineage. The moment you leave a few overgrown cucumbers or zucchinis on the plant, it considers its mission accomplished. It then diverts all its energy into ripening the seeds within these large fruits, drastically reducing or entirely ceasing the development of new flowers and subsequent fruit. Therefore, the correct strategy for these crops is frequent, selective harvesting. Walk through your garden rows every 2 to 3 days and pick only the fruits that have reached their optimal size. Don't hesitate to harvest those tender young cucumbers and smaller zucchinis. This is precisely what will encourage the plant to continue bearing fruit prolifically, and ultimately you'll gather several times more produce than you would with rare, everything at once harvesting days. And here's the real kicker. Most gardeners concentrate on the variety, fertilizers, and watering. They believe the battle for a bountiful harvest ends the moment the fruit ripens. But in reality, its future is sealed on the very day of picking. A mistake related to the time of day might seem insignificant. What could possibly change in just a couple of hours? Well, everything. A cool fruit picked in the morning will last 30–40% longer than one harvested under the scorching sun. And an invisible bruise from careless handling when placing it into a bucket will in just 3 days transform into a rotten spot that can quickly spread to neighbouring produce. It turns out that the most destructive mistakes aren't about agricultural techniques, but rather logistics. It's all about what happens in that short window between the garden bed and the refrigerator. As you can see, harvesting isn't just a mechanical action. It's a well-thought-out process that demands just as much attention as planting and tending. The right tools, the correct time of day, and gentle handling. These are the 3 pillars that ensure the longevity of your hard work. Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you learned something new and useful, please give us a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. Now, a question for you. Which of these mistakes surprised you the most? Or perhaps you've paid the price for one of them yourself? Share your story in the comments below and let's learn from each other's experiences.